coming up next. Stay tuned to learn more about the state of the art in blockchain and cryptocurrency technology. Reimagine 2020.
Recording now, and then we'll start in about 20 seconds or so. What time is it over there? About 6 p.m., I think?
6:10, yeah.
Yeah.
It's still early.
What's that?
It's still early here.
All right. Cool. I'll get started in about 5 seconds. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Reimagine 2020. I'm your host, Adam, with a very special guest today for this fireside chat. I have Oliver Birch from Wanchain. I've been talking to Oliver for quite some time now. We've been having various discussions in the blockchain space and education and community. So I'm very grateful to take his time today and for him to join us. For all of you watching, you know, the crypto space and blockchain industry has gone through its ups and downs. From, you know, back in with Bitcoin kicking off in 2009, leading up to some of the other smart contract platforms and different blockchains around 2014, 15. And I'm very happy to bring Wanchain on because they have really been in the space since 2016 or so. Their team is very diverse, very experienced. And now we're in 2020 and they're still here. So I'm very grateful. Let me go ahead and bring Oliver in. Oliver, if you want to just kind of state your name, your background, how you got into blockchain, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Adam. So, hey everyone, I'm Oliver Birch. I'm head of communications and growth at Wanchain. I started at Wanchain in August 2017. This was a few weeks before we're due to launch our initial raise, which was going through Chinese investors in the beginning. Then China banned ICOs, and we had to formalize a new strategy, come up with an international community, do the whitelisting processing, KYC, AML, and all of that. So I was helping out with all of that initially as a community manager. And then I started taking on more responsibilities, also heading up business development, and also leading one of the enterprise partnerships that we have with Telefónica's cybersecurity unit, 11 Paths. So I've been wearing, I guess you can say, multiple hats throughout the time, from community management to marketing to business development. I guess that's a normal thing as well in startups, which is great because you get a lot of experience in all these different fields, and you get to meet people of, you know, all sorts of backgrounds. And every day there's something new.
Awesome. And thank you for that introduction. You're totally right. I think in the startup world and technology, you definitely wear various, you know, multiple hats, and you're doing different tasks, which kind of gives you insight into what your team's doing, kind of what the market's doing. It really kind of molds your vision and gives you better you know, understanding of all the moving parts, right? So for everyone watching, the goal to bring Oliver on here was to, you know, shed light into the core meaning of what blockchain is. You'll be surprised to what you hear today from Oliver. And the overarching goal of our conference was to bring you reality, you know, bring the best minds that we know in the space that are doing hard work every day for years, trying to impact our future. They're adding value to the ways that we might do business, you know, down the road. And we're separating the noise from the facts here for our audience. So Oliver, again, thank you for jumping on. Let's kind of get into it. You work for Wanchain. For the audience that doesn't know, right? They think of blockchain, and some people think of Bitcoin. Some people think of blockchain as again a currency, but it goes beyond that, right? And so now we're in 2020. I kind of want to rewind this back to the early days of Wanchain, and maybe you can give some insight. To you, first of all, what is blockchain to you? And maybe not from a technical standpoint yet, of block size and the smart contracts, but what does blockchain do for us? Why are we talking about this?
Well, I think everyone has a different opinion of what blockchain, and someone will have one opinion. It's changes, no, but I think we can all agree that blockchain is one alternative to the current traditional financial system. I think we can all agree on that. It's distributed, it's accessible by anyone. Miners, or in the case of proof of stake, validators, they get incentivized for validating blocks on the network, but it's all community driven as well in the end. And it's all algorithms, right? So what's interesting about it is that anyone can join the network and anyone can participate in this. In the end, we can argue that blockchain means one thing to one person and another thing to someone else. But where we all agree on is that it's an alternative to the current economy, to the traditional economy.
Would you say that it also opens up much more possibilities outside of the currency aspect of it? The potential that blockchain taps into. Again, everybody has their own perspectives, and some people relate it to Bitcoin, but and maybe this will transition into what you're doing now. But Bitcoin came out, Ethereum came out in 2014 or so, right, with a different kind of structure and code base, and different different kind of vision, combined with the Bitcoin technology or again blockchain. But in your eyes, in your opinion, what has Wanchain done, to kind of embrace blockchain and embrace decentralization, and give some insight, from what is Wanchain doing now?
Sure. Yeah. I'll go back to 2016 because that's when our founder and CEO Jack, he founded a research team. He got together a research team from Peking University. They call it the Harvard of the East. And they were set to find a way to connect all of the different blockchains, private, public, consortia, because the vision in the end is that if we're creating this new economy, and it's accessible to everyone, there needs to be a way to link all of the blockchains together. Because if you're linking all of the blockchains together, technically you're also linking all of the communities, because someone on Bitcoin will be able to send Bitcoin to someone on Ethereum, vice versa. And I think, we started with that in 2016. In 2017, there was a proof of concept. Then we did our ICO in October 2017, where we raised from, it was about 6,400 people from over 100 different countries. We had a small private sale as well. But since then, we've established integrations to Ethereum, to Bitcoin, and to EOS. Each is completely different, has its own cryptographic hash function. There are different communities on the technical and business side. All of it is different, but we found a way to bridge them to our platform. And that's really what we've been building these past years. We've been focusing on the tech, on interoperability. And there are a few other projects out there. You have, for example, Keep Network that has the TBTC now on Ethereum. And you have the Wrap Bitcoin, which was Kyber, and a few other partners that released. But there's a centralized custodian. So there's someone that's holding those Bitcoin and giving out these tokens as IOUs. So if you want to redeem them, you have to KYC, you have to go through a process. Whereas with our interoperability, what we do, we lock assets on the respective chains. So in the case of Bitcoin, we lock the Bitcoin on the Bitcoin chain and we deploy a proxy token on Wanchain. And then you can use that proxy token within all of our different dApps. And if a user wants to redeem it for the native Bitcoin, they're able to do so at any time. There's no custodian, there's no one holding the assets, is what I mean. It's completely decentralized in that sense. Although you may ask, what about the different nodes that are securing these bridges? For example, Bitcoin to Wanchain or Ethereum to Wanchain. They're called Stormin nodes or cross-chain nodes, and we're decentralizing those. So currently they're being run by the foundation, but we're going to open it up to the community. There's going to be collateral, and there's going to be different bridges. Some bridges will be faster, which will charge less, and other bridges will obviously be slower and charge. Sorry.
No, I was just going to kind of start to interrupt, but that's kind of good points, right? Everybody watching here, even everybody in this space, for quite some time, and even now, there's a lot of projects coming out, a lot of blockchain layer 1 stuff, maybe coming out. And what was that thought process, I guess, with Wanchain to kind of quickly identify that interoperability was going to be key, right? Because everybody kind of knew it, but I feel that there was just still blockchains, and the focus wasn't on that. Maybe it was on like one of the 3 pillars of blockchain, which is security, like speed and decentralization, I believe. And so, yeah, how did you guys kind of foresee being interoperable with other chains? Because I think that's, for everybody watching, they've seen all of these blockchain companies come out. None of them really express interoperability. Maybe they talk about it, but I think initially they're focused on their own thing. But you guys came out the gates already ready to start working with other blockchains. So can you give some thought on that, on why and how that came about?
Yeah, sure. And I'll just refer to Jack's history for that, because Jack was in the space way before. He was an early investor in Bitcoin. He participated in the Ethereum pre-sale, and he co-founded Factom with David Johnston and a few others, where this was one of the first platforms, or one of the first projects really, to engage in serious business with enterprise. And this was before the whole ICO mania. So Jack had all of that experience, had been through bears and bulls, right? And both in the traditional world and in crypto as well. So he thought, well, there's going to be after participating in the Ethereum pre-sale, he thought there's going to be an explosion of ICOs and everyone's going to try and create a new blockchain and compete, but no one is looking at how to connect all of these different blockchains together. It's like in the days before the internet, when you could only talk to computers in your local network. So that's why Wanchain, or WAN, Wide Area Network, that's what WAN stands for, is to connect to the outside world. So that's exactly what Jack saw was in need, because no one was really talking about it. You had a few projects, I think Cosmos at the time and BlockNet, but other than that, everyone was just trying to compete with Ethereum. So the vision was, let's try and create this interoperability, create this middleware layer that connects all of the blockchains together. And it's, of course, it's different to oracles and APIs, right? You're not bringing real world data into blockchain as they are. In the case of Wanchain, you're transferring value across, and value can also be in form of data, which is why non-fungible tokens are interesting, because they're unique and indivisible. So that's something that we've got in the roadmap for this year. And recently we've launched the first cross-chain DEX with our partner Rivix. So you can trade these wrapped assets, wrapped Bitcoin, wrapped EOS, wrapped Ether, and of course the other integrations once they're established on this cross-chain DEX, which is something that you couldn't do before. Of course, you had some cross-chain DEXs, but they were all atomic swaps, and you would have to wait 20 minutes, like in the case of Komodo or BlockNet, and the user experience wasn't great. And still, we're not at that stage yet where usability is simple. No, most of the people using it are experienced crypto users that have been in the space for 2 to 3 years, or developers. But for the average user, we're still quite far away from that adoption. But if you look at 2017, 2020, as you mentioned, see how projects have developed, we have come really, really, really far away. But it doesn't mean that we're there yet, at least for adoption. I think it's going to take some time, especially with interoperability. But Gartner research, for example, said there will be 3 to 5 different interoperability standards leading the next 3 to 5 years. And I believe that's the case as well. And so far, we've only seen very few. A few projects have used our technology as well, like using secure multi-party computation for the distribution of the private key that holds those assets, in the respective chains and so forth.
As far as interoperability, you mentioned the DEX and being able to kind of move these tokens around, these NFTs around. What does that do? It might be further out, but I'm just trying to understand as well, along with our audience. What does that allow, like, the user to do? Maybe not tomorrow, and we're still working out the kinks. But what does that allow? What does the future look like, knowing that you guys have worked on this infrastructure, and now somebody that has Bitcoin, EOS, Ethereum tokens. What does it allow them to do, or what kind of transactions? Just if you want to touch on that.
Sure, and I'll speak a bit about the two-way bridge, which is something we're currently developing. We have talked a bit about it to our ambassadors and during some of the AMAs, but what we want to establish is a two-way bridge so right now how it works, we lock the respective, as I mentioned, we lock the respective assets on their chain, and then we deploy a proxy token on Wanchain. But with the two-way bridge, we'll be able to lock Bitcoin, Wanchain's version of the wrapped Bitcoin, on Ethereum, on EOS, and all of the other blockchains that we will integrate. So what does that offer to the user? What it offers.
And just to clarify, so somebody who has Bitcoin, EOS, or ERC20 token or ETH can come, jump on Wanchain, swap that out, get a wrapper, which means a Wanchain kind of technology, right? To bundle that up and then put Bitcoin or EOS or Ethereum on its respective chain.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So it would allow, for example, on EOS right now, there's no wrapped Bitcoin. There's no version of wrapped Bitcoin. And with the two-way bridge, we'd be able to provide a wrapped Bitcoin to the EOS community using our interoperability. And same as on Ethereum or the other blockchains. But of course, on Ethereum, you have quite a lot. There's 4 or 5 different wrapped Bitcoins currently. I think there's Keep Network, P tokens. There's the wrapped Bitcoin at Kyber, and then a few others. So we're looking at EOS to see what we can provide to them. And then once we establish more public chain integrations, we'll be able to offer them all of these assets as well, which they don't have access to currently. So it's really about, for example, on Ethereum before Bitcoin, all the pairs were in Ether, but now you're able to have the pairs in Bitcoin as well, providing more liquidity and more trading on DEXs, which is really needed because the liquidity on DEXs overall has been, as we know, pretty low. But I think with the crushing DEXs, it will stimulate more trading, more liquidity, and it's important, especially for to have a booming financial economy in the short term is the most important. Access to liquidity, trading, and that's really what we're building now, starting with this DEX, which is with wrapped assets, and allowing people also to then exchange the native Bitcoin to the wrapped asset. This is something we're looking to add to the DEX as well to simplify the process. Also lending and borrowing, so you can deposit Bitcoin, you can get a percentage for providing liquidity to the DEX. These are some of the things that we're looking at to increase usage. And that's just one part.
And I know it's still evolving, and for everybody that's listening in here, we're talking about decentralized exchange, which is different from a centralized exchange. Centralized exchanges right now are faster. You can the user experience is a little bit much better for the most part. And we're just talking about decentralized exchanges where it's non-custodial, so you hold your own keys and you're trading with others, which is a little bit slower, requires a little bit more functionality kind of aspects of the development part to make that flow well. My question before we kind of move on is going back to the centralization, normal centralized exchanges and DEXs. The volume is like you mentioned is really low and kind of cumbersome. And what you're telling me, or from maybe what I'm understanding too, is these wrappers and kind of the interoperability will play an important role on the influence on the DEXs, right? To increase transactions, increase more users to access that with the various tokens and chains, right? So it's gonna help out that space of DEXs, because I think a lot of people, the idea of a decentralized exchange, of owning your own stuff and hacks and security is all there, but when they get to it, it's maybe not quite what you hope it is. And I think you're adding value there. Is that correct?
Yep. No, exactly. No, I completely agree. Plus, at the same time, we have this liquidity aggregator that the Rivix team prepared that hooks it up to the centralized exchanges for added liquidity in case there's, yeah. So that's a solution that, for example, Orion Protocol is also working on, one of our partners, and we're looking at how to, boost that completely. So where users can deposit their assets and get percentages based on that as well. So similar to synthetics in a way as well. That's one of our projects Finexis is focused on, is on the tokenization of different assets. And they just launched here on Bitru Exchange before, a few days ago. And once there's more access to liquidity, and I think really what's going to get users from centralized to decentralized exchanges is going to be a big hack or some security issue in a big exchange where they have their assets, and there won't be anyone knowing, there's no insurance. So once that happens, I think we'll see a transition over to decentralized exchanges. But before then, there'll probably be, a lot less users as it currently is, but still increasing with time.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the infrastructure, right? The two main pain points on the DEX side is maybe some liquidity and then kind of the cumbersome interaction. And it seems like you're providing support there. So we just talked about interoperability and kind of those aspects, but you also focus on privacy as well and have some added features there. Can you touch base on why that's important, or what's different compared to, in general, some of the other chains that maybe don't focus on that, or they give up on one of the other, three pillars of the technology? So can you give insight into the privacy aspect of Wanchain?
Sure. So the team took the part of Monero's code of one-time addresses and ring signatures, which they inserted into the current code on Wanchain, which allows for these private transactions as well as public transactions. And right now with the private transactions, we haven't focused too much on it. Our team has been mostly focused on interoperability, but why it was there in the first place was to allow users that option. For example, I know in many cases projects still pay out salaries in crypto, and you don't want to know who's getting what. There needs to be some privacy there. So for paying out salaries, for these like payments that you don't want others to track or to map to, I think it's important to have that option.
Yeah, definitely. I think that would definitely speed it up. And all of these options, we've kind of talking about the public side of blockchain, but it seems like all of these features really maybe influence some of the decisions, or bring down the fear for maybe on the enterprise front. We've been talking about kind of peer-to-peer stuff and that kind of realm, but it seems like a lot of these features are kind of for maybe the liking of the enterprise front. Can you explain to me kind of, you guys have client bases and you're working with enterprises as well, and it seems like this is right up their alley, some of the things you're doing.
Yeah, we have been working with enterprises. Some of them are public, and our announcements that we made available to the public, and some of them are private due to the nature of the work that we're doing with them. But it's interesting because we're one of the few projects that, aside from the public platform, which is Wanchain, and interoperability and the privacy on that, we also have a team dedicated for building out private blockchains for enterprise. So these are fully customizable. It goes from consensus, speed, to permissions. And the team, they put together a package for the enterprise after speaking to them, completely customizable according to their needs. And this is something that we've been working on mostly in China with a few Chinese projects, and Lenny has been heading that up along with Jack. And there's some use cases that we'll be releasing pretty soon, a poverty use case, and there's another one with supply chain for tracking goods, which we'll also release in the coming months. Probably in 2020, in the coming months. So it's completely different because on one side we have the public platform, but then we also have the private blockchains, and the private blockchains need to be connected to the external world as well. They need some sort of interoperability, because if not, you might as well just have a database. If you're just building a permissioned private blockchain, then in the end, I would say it's almost better to have a MySQL database. In this case, the interoperability that we offer is of much interest to these companies because they're able to hash data onto Bitcoin, onto Ethereum, onto Wanchain. And that's really what I think we'll be seeing going forward, is this hybrid model between private and public blockchains. And we have teams on both sides, and that's what we've been working towards.
On the private side and the enterprise side, is that still considered blockchain, or is that DLT? I mean, obviously,
they're different.
DLT, but like, what makes it blockchain per se? Like the public transparency aspect of it?
Yeah, the public transparency aspect of it. There are people who argue DLT and others that say blockchain is blockchain. I don't really have an opinion of whether it's DLT or blockchain, but I think it's that.
And what's your take on maybe Hyperledger Fabric or something? Because it's kind of interesting that Hyperledger Fabric, is available. But what's cool and what I like about it is that even on the enterprise front, although that's an option to them and maybe not a safer bet, but just more of a, it comes from IBM, right? It's kind of a little bit more understanding. It seems like there's still a lot of interest on the public blockchain side, which is good for your team and me and everybody else involved. Well, why do you think that is? Why do you think there's still an interest on the public blockchain side? And you kind of said it, maybe the interoperability of it to kind of function around, Wanchain provides that feature to touch different aspects of blockchain or DLT. But again, why hasn't everybody just flocked to Hyperledger Fabric? I think that says something.
Well, one example is, are you familiar with the indie project, Hyperledger? Yeah. Self-sovereign identities. So that's Evernym had provided all of that code to the indie project, and self-sovereign identity is a great example of that, because we see that evolving throughout the next years, where you have one identity and you'll be able to choose what information to share. So it'll be like a Google sign-in, except access to health data, to your insurance, to your financials, and all of this will operate between different blockchains. And this is where it's important to have that interoperability. And a few of the companies we've talked to, most of the companies that we've talked to, at least here in Europe and North America, they are working with, not with Hyperledger, because that's a consortia, but on Fabric, where they have developers. But in the end, not many people are familiar with Fabric. And if you need a developer with experience that is familiar with Fabric with these different projects within Hyperledger, it's going to cost a lot, and it's a lot of resources that they have to pull into a pilot. Whereas with us, we could build out a pilot for probably much less, and then if they decide to go with it, there could be some sort of collaboration between the partners of Hyperledger, Wanchain, and the company, where we would provide that interoperability and the consultancy around it. So I see us evolving more towards interoperability, consultancy there in that aspect.
And you touched on it right now regarding use cases and POCs, and I'll get into dApps in a little bit. We just went through kind of the journey of why Wanchain is where they are today and what your focus is on. Mm-hmm. How do we increase everybody's watching right now, and they've been watching all of these blockchain companies and influencers in the space, and everybody is talking about different kinds of adoption, right? Like whether that's retail consumer adoption or enterprise adoption, which is here. We already know for a fact everybody's tapping into blockchain and putting their toe in the water and kind of trying to understand it. And then there's also kind of government adoption, right? Like they're already touching regulation and compliance. So that kind of it's snowballing and growing and it's here. But my question is, it's regarding like use cases and POCs. And I'll get into dApps shortly, but how do we increase use cases and POCs? You just mentioned it. It's kind of expensive in one aspect, and we won't name names, but some of these other, private chains, right? And then you just mentioned, if we work with Wanchain, we could definitely more flexible, smaller team, more to the point. How do we increase POCs and use cases to kind of push this along? And it can be a technical thing, or it can be a psychological, supply chain is one of them. And then we kind of hear these other thoughts on how we can use blockchain, but it still hasn't ballooned yet. And we know it's going to come. But what are some of the barriers right now?
I would say probably politics or tribalism. I think that's stopping a lot of the growth within blockchain.
And is that
a lot of the community.
You think that's generational? Like, the younger, as we get younger and people are getting used to blockchain and used to cryptocurrencies, the acceptance, right? When management and other people retire and, the demographics changes, you think that's when it'll obviously like kick into gear as well?
Yeah, I think so. And how all these virtual communities just spun out of nowhere, in regards to blockchain, where you have meetups with hundreds of people going to see one specific project, one talk. And this has been happening with all of the different blockchains, but it has also impeded growth in the sense that all of the communities, they see their blockchain or whatever tokens they hold there as theirs or as part of it, which is, I guess, a normal thing. But at the same time, it's also stopping a lot of the work together. I know Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, Hyperledger, and the different consortia have tried bringing projects together, to work on standards. And for example, Weijia, who's our head of engineering, VP of engineering, he's also the official representative for Enterprise Ethereum Alliance in China. And Wanchain, he's chairing the Interoperability Task Force, which is now with Clearmatics, Consensus, and Wanchain is part of. So there is some involvement there, but I think overall, everyone's trying to protect their own interests or their own interoperability and hope that is the one that is the ultimate for adoption, for example. So I think it's more on that's stopping it, but eventually, there'll have to be a choice. It doesn't have to be one interoperability solution, but as I mentioned before with Gartner research, a few could lead the way until there's a unified approach between combining all of the technologies together.
And would you say that right now, maybe it's cost prohibitive? Like, we've had these discussions, right? And a lot of the internal blockchain champions at these companies and all that have to pitch blockchain, right? And I think there's two things. One, how much does it cost to implement? And is it going to work? And then two, what's the result of, is it cost saving? Like, what's the benefit, right? Because I think some people are probably wondering, my company's systems work just fine on a centralized, server, right? And kind of one spot, but it kind of breaks beyond that in security and hacks and breaches. That's kind of one aspect maybe to include it. And then would you agree that, and then the other thing too is putting, using your development budget to try and build on blockchain, but we're not knowing what the result will be. Like, would you say that there's still a limited amount of data of like understanding blockchain's true value?
Yeah, definitely. And it's going to take many more years before we see, more adoption from enterprise. As you mentioned, it wouldn't make sense to apply blockchain to any scenario, and I think that's happening a lot. No, for example, with a vending machine, I saw a good example where it showed this complex system next to a vending machine, and literally wasn't needed. You don't need blockchain for that. And in many cases, if you have, in many cases, a traditional database is much better. But if we're looking at the bigger picture, if we're looking at disrupting the financial industry, and as we've seen with crypto's 24/7. I mean, you can go on Binance or on a DEX at any time during the day or the evening. There's no hindrance on geographic, on time, on who you are either. To a large extent, we can talk about KYC. That's a different matter, but it's all of the different components. And for example, with the pharmaceutical industry, because I worked there for 4 years before, specifically in clinical trials, and healthcare records are maintained, at least by many hospitals, in a really bad, they're just in really bad shape. They're not digitalized. They're in cabinets, sometimes in the toilet, I've heard, or on the ceiling, and it doesn't make sense, right? For those, you have to change the complete from legacy to blockchain, I think.
And real quick, and that's a great example for everybody watching. Is healthcare is one of them. Oil and energy is like another one. Obviously, we have decentralized finance, open finance. But going back to the healthcare thing, and I know we got like a few minutes left. And you just mentioned you're from the pharmaceutical, so you're a good person to probably ask is, what's the holdup on integrating this stuff? I know there's is it rules and regulations and compliance? Because I think the healthcare space is all siloed info. So blockchain seems like obviously the perfect fit to have multiple parties, and if they don't trust each other, this is a tool that they can use. But what's the delay there in implementing that? I do see a lot of healthcare like startups, and it's obvious reason, and I see a lot of people trying to work on it, but I don't know if it's been adopted quite yet. And maybe it's going back to your politics, and they don't want to integrate it, and it's going to take even much more longer, because I think the new people that maybe come into the healthcare space will obviously know, hey, we need to make a change here. If all this paperwork's everywhere, we can't facilitate function appropriately. So what's kind of the holdup in the healthcare and integrating blockchain?
Well, I think it's exactly what you mentioned: regulatory. For example, for a drug to go from research to production to commercialization, it takes about 10 years. And you have to spend, depending on the product and the pharma, at least $500 million on that process. And it might never be commercialized. So it might never reach past the clinical trial phase, 1, 2, 3, or 4, 4 being the last one before it's, 4 being when it's commercialized, just to see how it's affecting people long term. So I think it's just the fact that there's a lag in technology in the healthcare sector because of regulation, because it takes so much time to get things approved. Medical devices, medication, all of it has to go through at least 10 years before, not in the case of medical devices, but in the case of new medication, there's at least 10 years from research to commercialization. So that obviously also means that technology is lagging behind other sectors. So I think we'll see adoption there at a later stage than other industries. That's why you also see gambling and gaming as the ones with most adoption currently. Those have the lowest barriers to entry.
Yeah, you bring up some good points on the barriers to entry. There's just different spectrums of how to get in, right? And I mean, would you agree that blockchain will penetrate, these higher regulated verticals and industries at some point? Just a matter of time.
I believe so. Yeah, I believe it's a matter of time, but I don't think it's public chain is the answer, private blockchain is the answer. I think it's the hybrid. It's the combination of private and public. So we have to work with these producing the private blockchains, and the same with the public platforms. And obviously more so on interoperability. There's obviously bias in me saying that coming from Wanchain, but that is really what is needed to go forward. We need that interoperability, not just on the technical side, but we need to connect all of the different communities before things just get too tribalistic.
Yeah, you bring up a couple good points for everybody watching. It's like, we can have all these discussions all day about, how blockchain plays into our future and how we can apply it. But I think the tech is there and it's still being worked on. I think the next step is how do we use it, right? And then we're trying to identify, again, these use cases and making sure that it's applied right. And I think it's just going to be trial and error. Someone's going to try it, it's going to work, it's not going to work. And hopefully we can bring down that cost to keep trying. I think right now it's another barrier outside of politics and kind of generational is cost prohibitive. And my last question here is for those that are watching this conference and stuff, they might not have heard of Wanchain, but you've been around a long time. It kind of just shows how strong your community is. And maybe you can touch on, we got about 2 or 3 minutes left. We can touch on Wanchain's community engagement, global presence, because you guys have been around a while and you have a robust, following group. So can you give some insight? Because I know you manage that on how do you maintain that? It's really hard to get everybody involved, and it seems like you're on your, you've been doing that successfully.
Oh, thank you. Well, it was very difficult in 2017 with the hype that suddenly exploded around us, something that we couldn't control. And it was hard to keep track of that, but we have to thank our community managers, our ambassadors for, doing a lot of the work for us. We had people creating communities. For example, the Turkish community, they reached out to us and said, oh, we want to run a Turkish community. And they've been translating to Turkish. That's just one example. Same with the Spanish, same with the Brazilian communities. These are communities that were formed. We never asked anyone to do it, that were formed by different members, and they created content for them, and they gamified the whole blockchain education as well, doing videos. And this is something that I think is really important, is gamifying the whole experience. You have to, and then it applies to everything, not just to learning, but most importantly to learning. That's why Crypto Zombies, the Loom project, for developers, for teaching Solidity, has become so popular because of the gamification. But back to your question, we've also changed the structure on our ambassador program. So we have people doing video editing, we've got people doing graphics, writing articles for us, posting on Twitter, helping us out on Telegram, across all of the different social platforms. And these are all ambassadors. We have weekly calls with them. We go through strategy, community calls. They give us advice, they give us feedback, and they work on projects as well for the community. I think that's also why Ethereum was so successful, is because the community built everything for Ethereum. The community of builders and the community of projects and of investors, obviously, as well after. But in the end, it was the community that created the NFT standard, for example, and that created all of these projects. That wasn't Ethereum that went and said, hey, you have to go do this. It all came external.
And I think that's so important, which thank you for kind of touching on the community side and even bringing up the Ethereum side is, there's so much competition, right, with all these chains coming out. And you actually spearheaded it, I think, pretty on point, working with Ethereum at the same time, developing your own profile, right? Like adding your features and how you think it would work. And it's kind of led you to a good place and a good spot where maybe some of the other chains are not making that out alive, or, they're on their own, thinking that they can just take on the world. But it is a community thing, right? Ethereum has a strong community. And that was one of the discussions, over the last, for a couple of years now was, all these other chains trying to compete with them. At the same time, it's not about just like, is it faster, better, stronger? It's who else is supporting it, right? And there's so many groups and teams with documentation and developer tools, and even an extension of that is YouTube videos and on the education front. So it seems you guys, leverage that kind of Ethereum exposure, but at the same time developed your own way of operating, which is great. And you just touched on it, very active and with the community and the people that you work with, trying to push this thing. My next question to kind of tie this in is education, right? I think education plays a big role, and that is educating not from a formal university standpoint, but education on blockchain and what it is. And then there's a formal education. Are you a proponent of both to kind of, help adoption?
Yeah, and I think it's mostly important for the current people in crypto now to go through that process. But I don't think people getting in 3 or 5 years from now need to go through that. By that point, it'll be so simple that you don't need to understand how it works. No, it's the same with, if you look at the internet, I'm not too familiar with how it works, to be completely honest, but I don't need to because it gives me value. And it will be the same for blockchain. Someone will have a crypto kitty as an example, which is valuable to them for whatever reason, but then you'll be able to use that NFT for tracking and for other things as well. So it's really the value that you give to something. And we've obviously seen that there's a lot of value that people have been giving a lot of value to, well, the projects that they're currently running, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Wanchain, all of them, because there's belief in it. And so long there's belief in it, I think the project will be successful. But then there's also there's like a facade. You sometimes you don't see what's actually behind it because of the marketing or the hype or the fake comments or the overshilling, and then it turns out not to be true, or the fake partnership with an enterprise, which turned out to be a graduate program of that company. So there's a lot of that, and we need to weed out all of that now just to avoid the next wave of users falling into some of those traps. As you said, education is really important, and we're the key players here to ensure that it doesn't get out of control in a few years.
No, thank you for that. And we're coming up to time here, but I want the audience to, I think this was a great discussion with you, Oliver. Thank you for joining. And you brought up, we touched on a few things, but I think as a community, for everybody watching on what blockchain is, it's a community, right? It's a belief. It's working with each other. And those are, in a collaborative, open effort. And I think that plays into your technology, right? Like you mentioned, the meetups, and, we're going to conferences, and we're in all of these engaged forums and groups, and it kind of reflects in the Wanchain tech of that mindset and putting it into, the project. And I think that's why you've been so successful for quite some time. And I appreciate you joining here, Reimagine 2020. And we'll go ahead and close this out. For all of you watching, this is Oliver Birch with Wanchain. We appreciate you joining us. Hopefully you learned a lot from Oliver here and what they're working on. Oliver, where can people find you, and also look up more on Wanchain?
Yeah, you can find us everywhere on Reddit, Twitter, Telegram, but probably Twitter is the best if you have some questions. It's at Wanchain Chat. So if you join us there, please feel free to ask any questions. And I just want to say thanks again, Adam, to you and to the team at MouseBelt. We've had a great collaboration, and we look forward to working more with you. But I think what you're doing with education is great, and we really need that. So let's continue rolling the ball.
All right. Thank you for joining. All right, everybody. You guys have a safe rest of the time here visiting Reimagine 2020, and we'll see you again. Thank you. All right, cool. Oliver, sorry, we're going to end it here, but can you do a quick introduction? I might want to edit it out. Do name, name, title, and Wanchain, and excited to be talking to Reimagine 2020 or something.
Sure. Tell me one.
Go ahead.
Hey everyone, I'm Oliver Birch. I'm head of communications and growth at Wanchain. I joined in August 2017, and I've been with them ever since. And thank you for letting me speak today with you, Adam, at Reimagine 2020.
Stay tuned to learn more about the state of blockchain education at major universities all around the world. Reimagine 2020.